Okay, I'm going to talk today about what it means to have hearing loss. And I developed this talk really designed for the significant other, friend, or family member of somebody who is experiencing hearing loss, and to sort of explain what it might be like for the person with the hearing loss when they're trying to communicate. So, we're going to be going over what it means to have hearing loss and understanding the different types and severities of hearing loss. We'll be talking about implications for communication and strategies to enhance communication, as well as the effects that hearing loss may have on your body. There are essentially three types of hearing loss. There is sensory neural hearing loss, which is when there's pathology in the inner ear, the auditory nerve, or the auditory cortex. This type of hearing loss is typically permanent. It may fluctuate, but it usually just steadily declines over time. This is the type of hearing loss that is caused by aging or noise exposure. Conductive hearing loss is when there's pathology in the outer or the middle ear, and this is the mechanical part of your ear, the eardrum and the little bones that are behind the eardrum that move to enhance the sound as it's coming in. Conductive hearing loss is usually more temporary or could be treated maybe with surgery or medication. Sometimes it can be permanent and surgery is not an option, and the best treatment would be hearing aids. Mixed hearing loss is a combination of both of these types. So this is how we plot your hearing loss. If you've had a hearing test, you would see X's and O's graphed on this chart here. There may or may not be images and letters, but there are images and letters on this one to show you where the typical speech sounds fall in that green shaded area, and where typical types of environmental sounds may fall and the volume that they would be at. So people can have either a mild hearing loss, a moderate, moderately severe, or severe hearing loss, or a profound hearing loss. And the severity of the hearing loss is going to affect how serious their communication challenges may be. So if you have normal hearing, you can hear everything that is below this line. And if you have a mild hearing loss, then you can hear everything below that line. So you'll notice when you go from a normal hearing to a mild hearing loss, we're starting to lose some of the consonant sounds. This person may not hear the k sound, the f, or the s. And this is going to affect the clarity of speech. You can tell that somebody's speaking, but it might sound like they are mumbling or that it's not very clear. As we move to a moderate hearing loss, you'll notice that now we've basically lost all of the speech sounds, and somebody with a moderate hearing loss, if it's flat and across all of the frequencies, they may need assistance being able to hear. Speech may need to be louder, people may need to get closer to them, and this person would typically benefit from a hearing aid. And as we get into more severe hearing losses, we start to really restrict how much auditory input is actually being perceived. So hearing aids are usually the best option for somebody with hearing loss. Even a mild hearing loss, somebody can benefit quite a bit from hearing aids. And the hearing aids are programmed by your audiologist based on the results from your hearing test, your audiogram. They are designed to amplify the frequencies you're not hearing in order to bring your hearing as close to normal hearing as possible. Hearing aids provide a significant improvement to your hearing and communication, but there are some limitations, which we'll talk about now. We don't actually hear with our ears, we hear with our brain. It's actually at the level of our auditory cortex in our brain where we focus on the sound we're trying to listen to and tune out maybe the background noises. We use our information from vision to understand the facial expression and the context and connotation of what somebody's saying. We use the information coming into each ear separately to figure out where the sound is coming from and maybe how loud the sound is. And we use things like memory and speech recognition. Is it somebody familiar to us or somebody we don't know? Is it, do we have enough information about the context of what we're hearing to understand what's happening? So it's our brains that are sort of sorting out all of the auditory signals and all of the other information to comprehend and understand what's happening. And this is going to have several implications for communication. And this is why simply wearing hearing aids may not solve our hearing problems, because there are other things that need to be accounted for. The first thing is distance. So I often get the complaint that somebody who was fit with hearing aids may come back and say, you know, if my husband is speaking to me from another room in the house, I often don't understand what he is saying, even with my hearing aids in. The reason for this is that high frequency components in speech provide the most important information to us, but they dissipate over larger distances, and they're more likely to be absorbed by carpets, furniture, and drapes. This means if you're speaking from another room in the house, some of the most important speech sounds aren't actually reaching your partner's hearing aid. And the hearing aid won't be able to do anything with that information. And you're left with saying, pardon, or what was that? You know, I heard there was a voice, but I didn't understand what was being said. So if you're close together and you're in the same room, first of all, you won't have to yell because you're close enough to each other that your voice will be loud enough. And the speech frequencies that are most important won't have too many obstacles to try to get around in order to reach your partner's hearing aid. And finally, you're more likely to have your partner's attention because you're in the same room as them and they will know that you're there. The optimal distance is between 1 and 2 meters. Another important aspect is volume. People with hearing loss come in and say, you know, people tend to yell at me, but I don't feel like I hear them any better. So the reason for that is volume isn't as important as you think. It's actually much more important to speak clearly than loudly. So when you're speaking with someone with hearing loss, it's important to speak precisely and accurately. And make sure that you're pausing in between sentences to give them time to catch up with what they're hearing. It's helpful to provide context if you can. And one of the important things to recognize about yelling is that when we yell, it confuses our bodies. It makes us think we're angry when we might not actually be angry. So when you raise your voice, you're more likely to maybe have increased blood pressure and furrow your brow and strain quite a bit to get that volume out. And that's going to make your body feel like it's upset about something, even if you're not. And if you yell and the person doesn't understand and you have to say it again, you're much more likely to be fatigued by that and maybe go, oh, never mind, you know, it's just too much work to try to say this again. When you're speaking, it's important to maintain a very steady volume and try not to trail off at the end of your sentence. And also, by doing this, you'll be giving emphasis to some of the key words to make sure that each word in the sentence is clear to the individual with hearing loss. This context is an important aspect to understanding what's going on in the brain for somebody with hearing loss. So if the person with hearing loss hears the sentence, I put my "at" on my head and went out the door, there are several things that they have to process. They'll go, okay, it sounded like "at," so it rhymes with "at," It's something that goes on the head. Cap, hat, hood. Okay, it's probably hat. But there's always a bit of doubt where they go, did he say cat? No, that doesn't make sense. Okay, so process of elimination and putting all of this information together, he must have said hat. So the person with hearing loss is using context to try to figure out what might be said. Uh, and there's still some steps that need to go through in order to come to that decision. Where the other scenario is when there is really no context to use and all they hear is, can you hand me my blank? And they didn't hear that last word. There's not really much to work from, so they're probably just going to ask you to repeat it. Another important aspect to hearing loss is the signal-to-noise ratio. Research shows that people with hearing loss require a higher signal-to-noise ratio to understand speech clearly compared to those with normal hearing. Hearing aids can really help to improve the signal-to-noise ratio with the use of directional microphones. But they don't necessarily increase the signal-to-noise ratio that much compared to using a remote microphone or an FM system. Those are really the best ways to enhance the signal-to-noise ratio when you're using hearing aids, and they're used sort of in conjunction with the hearing aids. The signal-to-noise ratio is essentially the sound of the speech that you're trying to hear, how loud that is compared to the background noise. That's the signal-to-noise ratio. So people with fairly normal hearing can handle poor signal-to-noise ratios where the noise is almost as loud or maybe louder than the speech they're trying to hear. Whereas people with hearing loss require the signal to really stand out above the noise before they can process what's being said. And attention is also very important. So when you're listening with a hearing loss, it's not passive. It requires attention, focus, and effort. So people with hearing loss are expending way more energy trying to hear than someone with normal hearing. And this is called cognitive load. It would be extremely exhausting to be attending 100% of the time. So when someone with hearing loss is not listening, they are likely resting their auditory system. And then their auditory system needs to be alerted again when it's time to pay attention. So you might have noticed that your partner with hearing loss, when they're doing something else, like reading a book or watching TV or reading the newspaper, and you walk in the room and say something, even though you feel like it was a pretty good volume and you're close to them, they might still say pardon or can you say that again? And the reason for that is they weren't quite ready to listen. They were doing something else and their cognitive load was being prioritized to the task that they were doing. So the number one most important thing to take away from this presentation is effective communication involves having your partner's attention before speaking. That allows them to prepare their auditory system for listening and understanding, and it will help prevent frustration and breakdowns in communication. So, what is a communication breakdown? This is a perfect example. The person with hearing loss says, "What?" And then the person that was trying to speak says, "Oh, never mind." This is probably something that is familiar to you if you live with someone with hearing loss, and it's quite frustrating for both people. The person that wanted to speak is exhausted. They don't want to have to repeat themselves again, and they're not really sure what they have to repeat if they've been talking for a while. And so they just give up and they say, "Oh, never mind, it wasn't really that important." And the person with hearing loss might go, "Well, I do want to know what you have to say. I just wasn't ready to listen to it. I was doing something else. I was concentrating on something else. Or I just only missed part of it, but I don't know how to ask for you to repeat it without saying simply what." So the communication breakdown, nobody wins. Both parties are frustrated and it's not very effective. So, repair strategies are a good way to prevent this from happening. The person with hearing loss can say, can you repeat the part about blank? I missed that last part. Or can you say that a different way? Maybe if they've repeated it twice and it's still not making sense, maybe there's another way to say that sentence. Repair strategies combined with just understanding the environment can really help solve or prevent communication breakdowns. There are 3 types of communication styles for people with hearing loss. Passive communication style is when the person with hearing loss tends to withdraw. They maybe don't want people to know they have hearing loss, and maybe they don't feel comfortable saying, I can't really hear you if you're not facing me, or I'm having a hard time hearing in this background noise. So passive communication style is not very effective because the person with hearing loss, their needs aren't really being met, but they don't quite feel comfortable changing the environment or advocating for what they need. The aggressive communication style is sort of the opposite of this, and this is somebody that kind of dominates the conversation and they don't really let other people get a word in. And the reason behind this is the aggressive communicator is maybe afraid that if they aren't in control of the conversation, they might not understand what's being asked of them or said to them. But if they are the ones talking, they know what's going on and they can control the conversation. One thing I should have mentioned about the passive communication style is that they are less likely to say that they didn't hear something. They might just pretend they heard and smile and nod and, just hope that they caught most of it. So neither of those are that effective because people might misunderstand your reaction to something or might feel that you're being a bit aggressive and hard to talk to. The assertive communication style is really the ideal communication style for someone with hearing loss. Assertive means they know what it is they need in the environment in order to communicate effectively. So they can tell people, it's easier for me if you're facing me. Can you say that last part again? I heard this, but I missed that final word. I heard you say this, but I just want to make sure I heard that correctly. The assertive communicator isn't too dominating, and they understand that people are probably going to forget once in a while that they have hearing loss, and they just have to do a gentle reminder. People want to communicate effectively, and they aren't necessarily purposely making it more challenging, but people have their own habits of communicating, and sometimes they need to be reminded that that habit just doesn't work for you. And the final thing I'll be talking about is the effect of hearing loss on the body. So hearing loss can really cause fatigue. When you think about all of these processes that are happening during communication is a big part of our lives, our day-to-day living. And it's tiring when you have hearing loss, even with hearing aids, to try to focus and attend all the time and use all these extra resources to understand what's happening. So they're probably going to be a little more tired at the end of the day, especially if they have hearing loss and are not treating it with hearing aids. Trying to sort of suffer through a hearing loss that should have hearing aids and isn't being used with hearing aids can be causing extra fatigue unnecessarily. Muscle strain is another factor. If you're leaning in and concentrating, your body is going to be tense and you're going to be, focusing and concentrating with your whole body. And if you have one ear that is better than the other, you might be favoring that ear and turning your head, which again can have some effects on your neck muscles and back muscles. There is some more recent research that is linking an increased risk of falls to untreated hearing loss. So, if you can't hear your footsteps when you walk, there is a chance that you might not be as aware of your alignment in space, and you might be more likely to lose your balance. Another aspect to the increased risk of falling is that we are concentrating so hard, as we know, when you have hearing loss, that you might miss a bump in the road. You might be looking at somebody that you're walking and talking with and not be looking at the ground and not be looking at what obstacles might be in the way, and you're more likely to fall because you're concentrating so hard on hearing. And it's going to cause just general frustration and irritability if there are several communication breakdowns. This can cause problems in relationships at home and with friends or family. And it can also lead to isolation, anxiety, and depression if it's not treated and communication strategies aren't implemented. There is some link to memory loss in the sense that because of the additional cognitive load placed on hearing, it means there's likely less resources available for your working memory and maybe your long-term memory. So there's a lot of research in that area right now. So just some tips for the listener. This is for the person with hearing loss. It's important to advocate for what you need in a communication situation. People want to communicate with you and they want you to hear them. So they're more than willing to change the environment. They may just need to be reminded. It's important to nod and affirm that you're understanding what's being said. And if the person you're communicating with is looking at you, they might realize at what point you might have lost them, and then they can go back and say it a different way. It's important to avoid withdrawing from the conversation if you're not understanding. Make sure that you're not the passive listener or the aggressive listener, but the assertive listener. And then tips for the speaker. Again, the number one important thing is to make sure that you have the attention of the person that you want to listen to you. It's very important to make sure you're face to face if possible, and try to speak clearly with precision. Try not to trail off at the end of a sentence. And make sure that you pause between sentences so that the listener can sort of catch up and synthesize and integrate all of these processes to understand what's being said. And then try to avoid communication breakdowns by rephrasing what you were asking instead of saying, "Oh, never mind." And that's the end. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, you can direct those through the email on our website or give us a call at our office. Thank you.